Hello, Eric Holloway with the National Weather Service with Alaska State Wet Weather. For January 12th, 2023, a couple options for you. Our 1-800 number gets you through a phone menu system, also out on the World Wide Web at weather.gov/Alaska. And lastly, if you have any questions, comments, and concerns, please email us. For the hazardous weather, watch warnings and advisories. We do have a blizzard warning out. It remains in effect until midnight tonight for that northwest coast there. Winds up around 50 miles per hour, driving some whiteout conditions there. Otherwise, we have a winter weather advisory out, and that remains in effect until noon on Friday, and that's basically for the AKwx zone over to Kaktovik. Looking at the satellite image, you can see that low just south of Shimia and Adak, driving some snow showers, mixed precipitation across much of that area. An occluder front analyzed there. Also, you'll see some snow showers associated with a weak low up there near Seward Peninsula, driving snow showers through the southwest, up through the northwest, and over into the Brooks Range and portions of the interior. Also, a weak low down there near the Panhandle, driving some snow showers over that area. For today's weather on the surface map, looking at 958 millibars there with that low just south of the western Aleutians, mixed precipitation across much of that area. Snow showers ahead of the occluder front, otherwise troughs through the Gulf of Alaska, anchored by a 988 millibar low there, driving some rain showers through the coastal areas and snow showers limited in the inland areas across the mountains. And there's that snow showers up there around that low with weak troughs north and south, anchored from that low across much of the southwest and northwest with some snow showers in that area. For tonight's weather, looking at that 963 millibar low now, still slightly south of the western Aleutians with a occluder front, still mixed precipitation across much of that area, and snow showers along that front and into the northern Bering Sea. Otherwise, weakening trough, driving some snow showers through the Bristol Bay region, Kodiak Island, with a low in the Gulf of Alaska, spreading some light rain showers through much of the coastal areas, and some snow showers in the further inland areas, especially in the southeast Panhandle. Also, that trough remains driving some snow showers along the north slope with some blowing and drifting snow up that way, and that through tonight. For Friday's weather, snow and blowing snow continues possibility, especially through the northwest, with some snow showers lingering up that way. Otherwise, that low near the Aleutians, now a 966 millibar low with a occluder front, now stationary front on Friday, with again mixed precipitation across much of that area from western Aleutians, southern Bering Sea over to Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, snow showers ahead of that front, that weakening front actually. And lastly, low in the Gulf of Alaska, now 986 millibar low with a weakening occluder front, driving some rain showers at the lower elevations, coastal locations. Otherwise, some snow showers possible across the inland, further inland areas and the mountainous terrain. And then for Saturday's weather, that low finally makes it across the western Aleutians, 971 millibar low there with a weakening occluder front, mixed precipitation throughout much of the region from western Aleutians up into Alaska Peninsula. Snow showers through the northern Bering Sea down through the southwest. Otherwise, low pressure activity in the Gulf of Alaska, driving some coastal rain showers and snow showers again across much of the inland areas and mountainous areas across the Gulf region. Seems like we're going to be having this pattern for the couple days. And lastly, strong winds continue along the northwest coast. For low temperatures, we're going to be looking at For the southeast and south central region, Friday morning, 40 at Ketchikan, 41 in Sitka, 32 in Juneau, 30 in Yakutat, Valdez, 29, 15 in Anchorage, 26 in Homer, 36 in Kodiak, 17 in King Salmon, -8 in McGrath, 10 up there in Talkeetna. High temperatures Friday afternoon, 43 in Ketchikan, 44 in Sitka, 36 in Juneau, 33 in Haines, 37 in Yakutat, 34 in Valdez, 22 in Anchorage, 20 in Talkeetna, 33 in Homer, 42 in Kodiak, 32 in King Salmon, -2 in McGrath. For low temperatures Saturday morning, looking at 39 for Ketchikan, 39 in Sitka, 32 in Juneau, 28 in Haines, 32 in Yakutat, 28 in Valdez, 17 in Anchorage, 11 in Talkeetna, 27 in Homer, 38 in Kodiak, 24 in King Salmon, -10 up there in McGrath. For high temperature Saturday afternoon, 42 in Ketchikan, 42 in Sitka, 35 in Juneau, 35 in Yakutat, 35 in Valdez, 25 in Anchorage, 35 in Homer, 41 in Kodiak, 34 in King Salmon, -1 in McGrath. For the interior and North Slope, low temperatures Friday morning, looking at -12 in Fairbanks, -19 in Northway, -10 in Eagle, -16 in Fort Yukon, -7 in Anaktuvik Pass, -9 in Utqiagvik, 1 in Point Hope, -2 in Nome, -3 in Galena, -10 in Tanana. For high temperatures Friday afternoon, looking at -1 in Fairbanks, -7 in Northway, 0 in Eagle, -6 in Fort Yukon, -5 in Anaktuvik Pass, -5 in Utqiagvik, 4 in Point Hope, 7 in Nome, 3 in Galena, -1 in Tanana. For low temperature Saturday morning, looking at -19 in Northway, -13 in Fairbanks, -9 in Eagle, -16 in Fort Yukon, -17 in Anaktuvik Pass, -11 in Utqiagvik, -4 in Point Hope, -2 in Nome, -11 in Galena, and -13 in Tanana. High temperatures for Saturday afternoon, looking at -8 at Northway, -1 in Fairbanks, -7 in Fort Yukon, -2 in Eagle, -10 in Anaktuvik Pass, Utqiagvik -5, Point Hope 5, 12 in Nome, -3 in Galena, -2 in Tanana. Down through the southwest, Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians, looking at 4 for Bethel, -1 in Aniak, 21 in Dillingham, 25 in Cold Bay, 36 in Dutch Harbor, 35 in Shemya, 31 in St. Paul. Then for high temperatures Friday afternoon, looking at 9 in Ammonok, 13 in Bethel, 12 in Aniak, 27 in Dillingham, 36 in Cold Bay, 40 in Dutch Harbor, 39 in Shemya, 37 in St. Paul. Then for high temperatures Saturday morning, looking at 3 for Ammonok, 7 in Bethel, 0 in Aniak, 21 in Dillingham, 25 in Cold Bay, 35 in Dutch Harbor, 35 in Shemya, 31 in St. Paul. For high temperatures Saturday afternoon, looking at 12 for Ammonok, 15 in Bethel, 13 in Aniak, 29 in Dillingham, 36 in Cold Bay, 39 in Dutch Harbor, 38 in Shemya, St. Paul, 35. For the CPC 6 to 10 day temperature outlook for January 18th through January 22nd, we're going to be looking at below normal tilts across much of the northwest, down through the Seward Peninsula, and over into the YK Delta. Otherwise, some normal conditions possible through much of the northeast mainland, down through the interior and out through the southwest and across the Alaska Peninsula, and that includes south central Alaska as well. We're going to be looking at above normal tilts across much of the eastern interior, northern panhandle, and that extends into the central panhandle, and then normal conditions again down in the southern half of the panhandle. Then for the CPC 6 to 10 day precipitation outlook for January 18th through January 22nd, we're going to be looking at above normal possibilities across much of the mainland, with above normal tilts to a greater extent across much of the southern mainland into south central, into the Bristol Bay region. And that also includes the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island as well. And then as we step back across the northeast Gulf Coast, we'll see some above normal chances as well. And that extends over into the northern panhandle and central and southern panhandle as well. So looking at above normal temperature and precipitation possibilities across the state.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Welcome to Aviation Weather, starting with the flying weather Friday morning, looking at IFR conditions associated with a low-pressure system over the Stewart Peninsula, and that trough extends up into the Arctic coast there, so IFR conditions along the North Slope extending down through portions of the western mainland and extending down into Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, some low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, driving some low clouds and chances for precipitation and fog and low clouds across much of the Gulf region, extending into the Panhandle. Otherwise, some marginal conditions throughout much of the Bering Sea. For flying weather Friday afternoon, IFR conditions extending across much of the Bering Sea associated with a colluded front. Otherwise, some IFR conditions along the North Slope into the Brooks Range, and marginal conditions down through some of the mainland, the western mainland there. Otherwise, IFR conditions down through the Gulf of Alaska, again associated with low pressure systems and weak disturbances there. Otherwise, marginal conditions across the Panhandle and in extending portions of the Gulf of Alaska. Flying weather Saturday morning, continued IFR conditions along the North Slope into the Brooks Range, otherwise marginal conditions through much of the mainland with areas of isolated IFR conditions there. And again, across that colluded front, across the central Bering, IFR conditions, and it extends over into the Gulf of Alaska with low pressure activity. For flying weather Saturday afternoon, IFR conditions again along the Arctic coast into the North Slope, otherwise IFR conditions through much of the Bering Sea, Bristol Bay region, Alaska Peninsula, into the Gulf, and over into the Panhandle. Again, associated weak disturbances moving through that area of the state. Otherwise, VFR conditions across much of the mainland. Past conditions on Friday, IFR conditions up there on the North Slope, and same for Adigan, IFR conditions down through the Alaska Range, looking at Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal improving to VFR, and this will be the same for a lot of these passes in Alaska Range, rainy, marginal improving to VFR. Same for Windy, same for Isabel. Mintassa went for VFR conditions, but you could see some marginal conditions as you approach the north entrance. And Tanita went for marginal, improving to VFR. Portage went for VFR conditions down there. Chilkoot and White, IFR conditions, again with some low pressure activity and disturbances down that way. Freezing levels Friday morning, looking at surface freezing level cutting across the central Bering. Otherwise, it comes up through the Cook Inlet region over into the Panhandle. Elevated freezing levels between 2,000 and 4,000 feet across the Gulf of Alaska. Icing conditions on Friday, looking at between 4,000 and 10,000 feet over the western and central Aleutians, with areas of considerable moderate there. Also considerable moderate areas up in the southern Gulf of Alaska there near Kodiak Island, between 5,000 and 10,000 feet. Otherwise, isolated moderate conditions expected across portions of the Brooks Range, North Slope, down through the western mainland into Cook Inlet and over into British Columbia. For the jet stream on Friday, low pressure system analyzed at the jet stream level up around 250 millibars, counterclockwise flow around that system, anywhere between 40 and 65 knots cutting across there into the Bering Sea. Otherwise, westerly winds across the northern mainland, anywhere between 60 and 75 knots there. Otherwise, pretty much light and variable across the southern mainland into the Panhandle. For 9,000 foot winds on Friday, that low pressure system out there in the western Aleutians, counterclockwise flow once again, 30 to 35 knots cutting across the central Aleutians into the Bering, otherwise light and variable across the mainland into the Panhandle. We do still have some pretty strong easterlies along the Arctic coast there, anywhere between 35 and 45 knots there. For 3,000-foot winds on Friday again, that low analyzed vertically stacked there out there in western Aleutians, anywhere between 40 and 55 knots cutting across the central Aleutians into the Bering Sea, light and variable across much of the mainland, and again strong winds across the Arctic coast, 45 to 60 knots up there. Low pressure activity in the Gulf of Alaska. And lastly, for the turbulence on Friday, looking at isolated areas of anywhere between isolated moderate to considerable moderate pockets across the Gulf and Aleutians, which could extend anywhere between surface and 6,000 feet.
Greetings, Mars Marvelers! At the end of this week, Mars is ending retrograde motion in a cosmic backpedal. This had astronomers scratching their heads for centuries, but now we can see what's really happening, so let me show you. Hit the darkness any night this week after sunset. Mars is in the east, and on January 12th, it'll appear to stop and head back the way it came, ending its retrograde motion. Mars switches every 26 months as it's in a wider, slower orbit than Earth. Basically, we pass it in the sky, just like passing a car on the highway. Mars appears to slow relative to the background and then reverse as we pass it. Observers on Venus or Mercury would see retrograde Earth orbits. Cool. Before planetary motion was understood, people thought whenever Mars began moving backwards, war, pestilence, and death were not far behind, but this is the end of that motion, so the opposite, I guess? Keep looking up.
Since I was a little boy, I've traveled 40 to 50 miles up that river. I'm a commercial fisherman and a hunter. I hunt and I fish for my food to put on the table, and I love it. I'm Jerry Ivanoff, born and raised in Unalakleet, Alaska. I fear not for myself, but for the future generation. The lack of ice, the lack of snow has an effect on the animals and the fish that we depend on to live.
The Arctic Report Card workshop here in Nome, Alaska has been an opportunity for Indigenous people who are along the Bering Sea coast to share their experiences about the impacts of climate change for our future generations.
The Arctic Report Card is an annually produced peer-reviewed report on the state of the Arctic.
The annual Arctic Report Card says the pace of sea ice decline and surface ocean warming is unprecedented.
U.S. government scientists say there is an unparalleled period of warmth in the Arctic.
This year, for the first time, we are including a chapter on the Indigenous perspective. Specifically, it will be a chapter focused on the changing Bering Sea.
I think observation is very important.
My grandparents, they taught me how to look in the sky and observe the clouds. And they used to call me their weather person.
My father was very aware of the environment and the weather conditions, ice conditions. So he spent a lot of time talking to me about what to look for and what to watch out for.
Scientists will come in, spend a year or two in the Arctic, and then gather a whole bunch of information, then go back. The big advantages that Indigenous people have is that they're there the whole time.
And they've seen significant changes that should have been documented starting 20 or 30 years ago.
For many years, the formula has been to invite one or two indigenous experts into a room full of scientists to hear what they have to say. At this workshop here in Nome, we are trying to shift that balance in a major way where essentially I'm the only scientist in the room.
And we are good stewards. We never depleted any stocks. We kept our land and our waters clean.
When I was growing up, the Bering Sea would be completely locked up. And now what ice we get is, we call it sikulik. That's the young ice that's formed from the bottom of the ocean as slush. It floats up. Now it's thin. It's easy to break up.
We need the ice, and with it diminishing, our walruses are in danger. Even the whales that I depend on are in danger.
We have frequent storm surges, flooding, hotter temperatures, not only in the air but in the water, and it's affecting the well-being of fish, plants, and animals.
With the water being 10 to 15 degrees warmer in the Norton Sound, I caught so many belly-up fish in 2019 I've never caught before. My nets actually were totally stinky.
The biggest change I see recently is the lack of the seabirds, the migratory birds.
As a child, we had more subsistence foods. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had a lot of food, which makes up for everything. We were rich with our foods. Today, I worry about that food disappearing.
We're having to adapt to change our ways of hunting.
It's a whole different world that we're going to have to learn to deal with.
They're seeing now what many of us are starting to see or will be seeing soon, and the longer we ignore these kinds of stories and these kinds of examples of what's in store for us, the worse things are going to be.
It is critically important for Indigenous experts from Alaska, like Jerry and Melissa, to come to major scientific meetings, like the American Geophysical Union in San Francisco, to share their observations about the warming Arctic.
10 years ago, our sea ice was about 20 miles outside of our communities, and now it's at minimum 50 miles out. It's just up to us to continue to adapt and not just stay stagnant.
I feel very positive that our voices are finally being heard.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Taking a look at the marine forecast, starting with the ice edge. Ice forecaster continues to note some higher concentrations of ice closing in around St. Matthew Island. I guess other story is continued ice growth there and the southern progression in the Bristol Bay region. Also some ice there in Cook Inlet and down into the southern end of the Cook Inlet as well. The marine forecast for southeast looks like winds will be generally out of northerly direction for the inside waters, 10 to 15, with the sea as high as 4 feet. Outside waters, winds generally from an easterly direction, 20, with seas as high as 11 feet. For Saturday's marine forecast, inside waters, winds generally from a northerly direction, 15, with seas as high as 4 feet. Outside waters, winds generally from a easterly direction up to 20, with seas as high as 10 feet. For South Central, Friday's marine forecast, looking at for the Gulf region, winds generally from an easterly direction, 20 to 30, with seas as high as 10 feet. For Prince William Sound, winds generally from the northeast at 10, with seas as high as 2 feet. Cook Inlet region, winds generally from a northeasterly direction, 10 to 30, with seas as high as 9 feet, or the southern end of that Cook Inlet. And then Saturday's marine forecast, South Central for the Gulf, winds generally from the east at 20 to 30, with seas as high as 10 feet, so look for gales there on Saturday. Also for Prince William Sound, winds generally from the northeast at 15 with seas as high as 2 feet. Down to the Cook Inlet region, winds generally from the northeast 15 to 30 with seas as high as 9 feet. Look for small craft advisories in there as well. For For Friday's marine forecast for Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, winds around Kodiak Island from the northeast 25 to 30 with seas as high as 11 feet, so look for gales there on Friday. And then for the south side of Alaska Peninsula, winds from the east at 20 with seas as high as 13 feet, so look for gales there as well. And for the north side of Alaska Peninsula, winds generally from the east at 20 to 25 with seas as high as 5 feet. For Saturday's marine forecast, around Kodiak Island, winds variable direction 15 to 25 with seas as high as 14. And south side of Alaska Peninsula, winds generally from a southeasterly direction up to 25 with seas as high as 12 feet, so look for gales there again on Saturday. And for the north side of Alaska Peninsula, winds from the east at 20 with seas as high as 4 feet. For loose and chain on Friday, looking for winds generally from an easterly direction up 20 to 25 with seas as high as 19 feet, so look for gales across that southern side of Alaska, the Aleutians, again on Saturday with seas again anywhere between 18 and 20 feet. For Saturday's marine forecast, Aleutian chain, looking at winds generally from a southerly direction, anywhere between 15 and 25 with seas as high as 14 feet between Shemya and Kiska, so look for small craft advisories there on Saturday. And then for Friday's marine forecast for West Coast, looking at winds generally from the northeast at 25 to 35 with seas as high as 15 feet, so look for small craft advisories there on the south side of that ice edge. And around St. Paul, St. George, winds generally from the east at 30 with seas as high as 12 feet. Saturday's marine forecast, winds generally from the northerly direction 15 to 30 with seas as high as 11 feet. Again, small craft advisory probably on Saturday on the southern edge of that ice edge. For Friday's marine forecast for the Arctic coast, winds generally from a easterly direction along the Beaufort Sea coast up to 30, down through the Chukchi Sea coast, winds from the northeast at 30, and then down through the Bering Strait, winds from the northerly direction 15 to 25. And for Saturday, winds generally from a northeasterly direction up to 20, down through the Chukchi Sea coast, winds anywhere between 25 and 35, and then down through the Bering Strait, winds from the north at 30. For tonight's weather, looking at the surface map, 963 millibar low. They're out there in the western Aleutians, an occluder front, mixed precipitation throughout much of the region, snow showers along the front and just ahead of that. Otherwise, some lingering snow showers blowing and drifting snow along the Arctic coast north slope, and lingering low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, 985 millibar low there, with coastal rain and snow showers further inland. Much the same scenario on Friday with low pressure system over Aleutian and in the Gulf.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.